Hello and welcome. Welcome to another adventure on green careers. And Laura, we just were in the Arkansas River and we're going to expand our river conversation today.
We sure are. I'm so excited to have you all join us here today. I'm Laura Downey. I'm with the Kansas Association for Conservation and Environmental Education. And we are so pleased and proud to partner with USD 259 Wichita Public Schools and the amazing Miss Smoke, and then also with the Kansas Association of Conservation Districts to take you on a quest to explore the many and fabulous opportunities that are open to you as careers in green fields. And so I am very honored and excited to be here today.
And we have really enjoyed learning today. So let's bring on our next guest. Are you ready?
Yay.
Everybody, meet Dawn. Hi, Dawn.
Hi, everyone. It's good to see you.
And Laura, you're a fan of Dawn. What makes her role, her job super exciting?
Oh my gosh. So Dawn is, you know how Dean said he was the guardians of the grassland this morning? Well,
Yes.
Dawn is like the guardian of the rivers here in Kansas. She's the Kansas Riverkeeper, and she does so much work in both promoting the health and the quality of the river, getting people out on the river. She takes hundreds of people, maybe thousands of people out onto the Kansas River in kayaks on an annual basis. She works with policy around our rivers and keeping them healthy and usable for both the wildlife that live there, but also the humans who interact with it on a daily basis. And she is one of my favorite people. So I'm so pleased to introduce you to Dawn Buehler.
All right, Dawn, we'll hand it over to you.
Thank you, Laura. Thank you so much. It's so good to see you all today. Welcome. So today I am not on the river, and the reason I'm not on the river is because I also do work in policy. And today was a policy day, and on a policy day, you're in a little dressed up clothes instead of your river clothes. But I want to share with you some information about what I do for the Kansas River and my role as the Kansas Riverkeeper. So I'm going to start off, I'm going to share my screen. So I have a few photos and fun things I want to show you. All right, let's get started. So this is a beautiful photo, isn't it? This is the Kansas River, and most people don't think of it this way. I'm going to share with you here in a few minutes a map of the Kansas River so that you'll have a context for it. So the Kansas River, it's a prairie-based river, and it's in roughly from the middle part of the state in the northeast corner of Kansas all the way to Kansas City. And I always like to start off by showing a pretty photo of the place that we work for. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about who I am so you can have an idea of how I came on this journey to be the Kansas Riverkeeper. So I grew up on a farm, a 2,000-acre vegetable farm in the little town of DeSoto, Kansas, on the banks of the Kansas River. My dad was a farmer, and if any of you are on farms and growing up on a farm, you know that everybody works. And I had a really good childhood working on the farm and learning about how to take care of the land, but also how to take care of our river, because what happens on the land impacts what happens with our rivers and streams. I'm a big outdoors person. I love to fish. So it's really important that we have healthy waterways for our aquatic life. And I'm a mother and I'm a grandmother. I have a 2-year-old grandson. They live all the way on the other side of the state. I live on the eastern side. They live all the way almost to Colorado, still in Kansas though. So that's a little bit about me. My job as the Kansas Riverkeeper is a pretty cool job, I gotta admit. I really like doing it. There's a lot of cool things that I get to do with this job, but really what it boils down to is my job is to take care of the Kansas River. And I do that in a lot of different ways. I go to meetings like I did today, where I talk about things that impact the Kansas River. I might say, well, you know, that idea that you have for this new facility along the Kansas River, can we make sure that we put in green infrastructure so that we protect the water quality of the river? Or maybe we're going to put in a grassland buffer. Or can we make sure that the public has access to the river? We want to make sure that we don't build so much structure around the river that people can't go there to fish and to kayak and to enjoy the river. So I have been in this job about 10 years, and this is truly one of the fun parts of my job, is to be the Kansas Riverkeeper. The other part of my job, probably still fun, but in a different way, is I get to be the executive director of our nonprofit. So basically, it's like running a business. You have to make sure that you pay the bills and that you raise money and that you take care of things. So let's talk about the area that I work to protect. This is the Kansas River watershed. And a watershed, you might have learned, is the area where everything drains to a single point. And in our case, it's the Kansas River. But our watershed covers 3 states, the upper half of Kansas, almost the entire upper half, the central Nebraska, and eastern Colorado. How many of you have been to Lyman, Colorado? Raise your hand if you've been in Lyman, Colorado, and you stood and turned to the east and the rain came, and as the raindrops come down, if you did not use that rain for some other purpose, eventually it would make its way into the Kansas River and make its way all the way across the state.
So just to be clear, some of our water that shows up in our rivers is not even falling here in Kansas.
That's right, it's not. I thought for a second, I'm sorry, that it had dropped. So right, so the water doesn't have to fall in Kansas. It can fall in Nebraska or in Colorado and make its way here to our river right here in Kansas. It's a pretty cool network of rivers and streams, which is why it's so important that we work to take care of the land so that we can take care of our water. This is a picture of me standing in the middle of the Kansas River on one of our many cleanup events, just to show you that it can be really dirty work because, as I'm going to show you now, we clean up the Kansas River too. I also am appointed by Governor Kelly as chair of the Kansas Water Authority. And I know those are a lot of words, but it basically means that I work on a board where we talk about water policy and we talk about water planning for the entire state of Kansas, which is also pretty cool. So this is a fun statistic that I get to talk about. We've removed over 3,000 tires in the last 5 years. Is that neat or what? We have a lot of volunteers that work really hard to pull the tires out. And you might be wondering, how did those tires get there? Because there's so many. Back many decades ago, a lot of landowners would take used tires and put them on the banks of their farms to keep the river from taking the soil and the sediment from their farm. Basically, they wanted to hold the bank so that they didn't lose part of their farm to the river. Well, we now know that those don't really work to stabilize the banks. We need trees and deep-rooted grasses. But all of these tires remained, and during flood events, the tires would wash out of the banks and they would wind up all over the sandbars of our river. And so our volunteers go out and remove all of these tires, and we work with lots of partners to get them out of the river so that it can be a better place for all of the wildlife and for the people to use. These are also battery cases near Manhattan that we've taken out of the river. We also have big appliances. You'd be surprised what makes its way into the river. deep freeze, a septic tank. These are big items, and it takes a lot of hard work and a lot of partners and a lot of help to get it done. Just a couple more examples of how we use the river. In a kayak, I kayak a lot, which I'll talk about here in a little bit, and more tires. So here's my career story. I didn't start out working in conservation. I had a very different path. I started out as a farm kid. I grew up on a farm and I learned how to work hard. Then I went to college, the first generation to do so, and I became an accountant. And I did that work for about 15 years. And it was at that point that I was spending all of my free time doing conservation work on the weekends. And I decided to go back to college when I was in my 30s. You're never too old to go back to school and to learn something new. I am a lifelong learner, and I will be learning for the rest of my life. But it was pretty neat to go back to school and to get another degree in my 30s. And then I started a whole new career, which is how I landed right here to being the Kansas Riverkeeper. And I think that if I wouldn't have gone back to school in my 30s, I probably wouldn't be in this job today. All
Hey,
right,
Dawn,
yeah.
what did you go back to school to learn about that set you on this path?
I got my degree in natural resources, fish and wildlife conservation from Oregon State University. And I had a real interest in the land and the water. And so I knew that I wanted to find a position where I could work on both. And this job at Friends of the Cause, a perfect combination of that.
I have one other question for you. Um, you do a lot of cleanup and getting folks out to help you do that cleanup, and as you showed, some very big items. What would happen if you weren't doing that?
Well, there's a couple of things. First of all, our river ends up with way too much trash in it. And this can be harmful to people that are recreating, of course. It can be harmful to boats that are on the river. We have had instances where boats have hit trash that's in the river. But really, even bigger than that, it's so detrimental to aquatic life, to the fish that live in the water. And I know that you saw a really cool um, fish class here a little bit ago where you got to see a lot of different fish like gar. There are gar in the Kansas River. They hang out where all the other smaller rivers come in to meet the Kansas River. And we want to make sure that we keep their home as clean as possible. Also, there are just a lot of ways that trash can get into our drinking water supply. When cities pull in water, they get the trash too. So they have to separate it so that they can clean the water so that we can drink it. So when we keep our trash out of our rivers and streams, it makes it easier for them also. But also, it just looks better. If you're sitting on a park bench and you want to look at the river, it's a little more enjoyable if you don't have the trash there. So Laura, thanks for asking that question. All right, guys, are you ready to see some of the ways that I do my job? One of the ways that I do my job is I use these little guys. Does anyone know what these are? I have a couple of them here. I carry a box of these in my truck or my car at all times. They're little bottles. And you screw the top off, and they're glass, and they're to put something in them, right? So I use these to take water samples because we're interested in knowing what the water quality is in the Kansas River. We're interested in knowing what the pollutants might be in the river. And so one of the ways that we do that is we take water samples. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how to take a water sample. First of all, it's one of the most important things is you have to put on some gloves. And the reason that you put on some gloves is because you don't want to contaminate the sample that you're taking with other pollutants that might be on your fingers. You might have things on your hands. So I'm going to talk about how you take a water sample from a river, because that's different than taking a water sample from, say, a lake or just a bucket of water. I did bring a bucket of water today to show you all, but I am going to talk to you about how to take it from a river. So when you take it from a river, you want to make sure that you are upstream of where you want to take the water from. That's important because when you walk into the water, you're going to stir it up a little bit. You want to try not to do that because you're going to have to get into the water. So you walk in, try not to stir up the sediment or the dirt that's in the bottom of the river. And then when you have a new bottle, you take the cap off. And I'm going to show you using my bucket of water. I have a bucket of water, but basically you have to rinse it 3 times. And this is to make sure that it's ready to accept the sample. So when you take your bottle, you go down into the water, fill it up with water, and then you dump it out, and you do it again, and you dump it out, and you do it a 3rd time. You're rinsing it, and then you're ready to go. Now in a river, what you're going to do is you're going to you want to face this so that you get the water from the moving stream of water. And you push it down into the water column, down into the water, and then you turn it and bring it back up and fill the bottle full of water. What you want to be careful to do is not to do it in the spot where your feet are. So you don't want to have anything kicked up from the bottom of the river get into it. And then when you're done, you put a cap on it, and then you put a label on it, and you label what the sample is. So like sometimes when I do water samples, I might say sample number 1, and I have a map that I've already created and said sample spot number 1 is going to be here, here's number 2, here's number 3. So then when I fill out my jar, I will say sample number 1, sample number 2, or sample number 3, so that I know where that came from on the map. Because once I get the results back, I'm going to be interested to know where that might have come from, especially if the result is something that's interesting that I don't recognize. So that is one of the tools that I use in my job as Kansas Riverkeeper. It's a lot of fun. I get to spend a lot of time outdoors. I probably am on the river in the summertime 4 times a week. And then during the winter, a little less, just because it can be really cold. And also you get ice on the river, and it's not very safe when there's ice on the river. So we have to make sure that the conditions are right before we go outside safely. So that's how I use those today.
Hey, Dawn, what are
Yeah.
some things that you're testing for when you're doing these water samples?
Thank you, Laura. So there's lots of different things that we can test for, but I'll give you some examples. Recently, I took samples and we were testing them for what's called, it's the nickname, the acronym is called PFAS. It's a chemical it's a forever chemical that is found everywhere, all over the world, in lots of different places. It's in many things. For example, it's in Teflon. So Teflon pans have PFAS in them. And so we did some sampling of the Kansas River because we wanted to see whether the levels were high. And we had an idea of places where it might be, just based upon historic businesses and what they made we're talking during the 1950s, so a long time ago. It just so happens that the Kansas River did not test very high for PFAS, which was great news. We were happy to get those results back. Other things that we test for, we're going to test for nitrates and for phosphorus, because we want to see what levels those are. And those can come from soap or from manure, whether it's from livestock or from pets, such as dogs, or from wildlife. All of those different, any sort of animal or humans can contribute to those numbers. We also just recently did both soil, and water testing for a chemical called 6-PPD, and it's a preservative that's found on tires. And that preservative, in some cities, like specifically in the Pacific Northwest, so up around Seattle, Washington, that area, what they found is that that chemical, it sloughs off of tires when it rains, and it washes into rivers, and it's killing the salmon, which is a horrible thing to happen. And this protectant is on tires all over the world. And so we have so many tires in the Kansas River. We wanted to see if we had elevated levels. So we partnered with the United States Geological Survey, and we took samples for a research project that they were doing. And they actually just released their report. So maybe we can share that after today. Okay. Any other questions about water sampling? I know it's kind of geeky, but it's fun.
Was there anything that you've found that's surprising?
I think the biggest thing that is always the most surprising is the amount of plastic that we find on the Kansas River. And it is not just big pieces of plastic. We will find huge areas where they're filled with nothing but water bottles, and there will be hundreds of water bottles, or Pepsi bottles or Mountain Dew bottles, but plastic bottles from single-use drinking. We find those in large quantities, and it can take us up to a day to remove all of those by kayak. But I think what's really astonishing also is that those plastics will break down over time with all the water and the sun and the elements, and they turn into what's called microplastics, which are little bitty pieces of plastic. And we find little pieces of plastic now washing up on the banks of our sandbars. And it's not a huge number, but it is growing. It's grown over the last 10 years that I've had this job, and I find that the most disturbing. So if we have an action we can do today, we can reduce our plastic use. That would be great for our rivers and streams. Okay, so when you're done with your gloves, you take a thumb and you pull them off because you don't want whatever yuckiness is there. And then you take a thumb and you pull them off, and you pull them off inside out. That's how you take off your gloves when you're done. Okay, was that fun? Do you guys want to go do some water testing? We have some great ways that we can get kids out to do water testing, so lots of fun to be had. All right, I do have another item. Do I have time for another item?
Sure.
Let's do it. Okay. I'm going to put on my life jacket because you can't be out on the water without a life jacket. This is like the most important tool that you will have when you're working in water, is to wear a life jacket, and you have to buckle it. You have to make sure it's zipped up. I wear a life jacket all the time because I kayak the Kansas River. So you're not going to be able to see the whole thing because it's long, but I brought my paddle today. What's cool about my paddle? I have a 14-foot kayak that goes with it. And this is how I go up and down the Kansas River. So one of the requirements of my job, and it's a pretty cool requirement, although it's a lot of work, but I love it, is that I have to kayak all 173 miles of the Kansas River every year. So I start in the spring, and I put together a calendar of how I'm going to accomplish that. And what I'm looking for is I'm looking for trash, I'm looking for pollution, I'm looking for microplastics, I'm looking for, unfortunately, dump sites, which is where landowners have shoved a bunch of trash down the bank of the river, which, by the way, is illegal. And so I'm looking for all of those things so that we can keep our river clean. So that's one of the really fun parts of my job is I get to kayak, and I also take a lot of people out on the Kansas River with me, both the public and students like you, out to go on the Kansas River. So I just have a few minutes left. Do we want to go to questions?
Is there a chance do you have your kayak with you?
I don't have my kayak with me, but I do have some cool trivia questions. Do we want to try those?
Sure.
Okay. Are you guys ready?
Mm-hmm.
So the Kansas River begins at the junction of two rivers, the Smoky Hill and the Republican Rivers. What is the name of the Geary County town where these two rivers meet?
So the wheels are going to be turning. Some people are pulling out Google Maps. Is there a hint you could give them?
Let's see. It's towards the middle part of the state. Two rivers coming together. It's right near Milford Reservoir.
And it's in the name of the place, yeah?
Of the city. Yeah, it's where two rivers meet. That's why they call it this name.
Ooh. Junction City?
Yay! That's right, Junction City. Okay. I am going to ask, let's see, true or false? You can paddle any river in Kansas wherever you want without landowner permission. Anyone know the answer to the Kansas River laws?
Is it any river?
Is it true or false that you can paddle any river in the state of Kansas?
Let's see what folks have to say here. Any guesses? True or false? I think it's true. We don't have any brave enough to guess here, but I think it's maybe true.
It's false.
Oh!
So there are only 3 fully public rivers in Kansas: the Kansas River, the Arkansas River, and the Missouri River. All other rivers are private with that on both sides unless they have federal, state, or local land. But on these 3 public rivers, you can fish, you can camp on the sandbars, you can pitch a tent, you can kayak the full length of these rivers. You don't need a permit and you don't need a reservation. So we call it our last wild places to go on these rivers.
That's awesome.
Pretty cool.
In the last few minutes that we have, would you talk a little bit, Dawn, about what students who are like in middle school and high school could be looking at and studying if they were interested in working with water?
Absolutely. So I think first and most important is to take science classes where you can learn about watersheds and learn about water. But outside of the school classroom, there are some really great opportunities for you to learn. You can go to conservation days. A lot of the schools across the state will have conservation education. Lots of different activities that you can do, like water days, if you can participate in any of those. But there are also other organizations like my organization. We do a lot of work with kids. Laura's organization, Casey, does a lot of work with students. But there are also conservation districts in your county where you live. They host a lot of different fun educational events that you can go to and learn about water and the interaction with soil and the interaction with the land. Those are important ways that you can learn about those things. So I would encourage you to find as many opportunities as you can to go out and learn different things at different events. You can also volunteer. We have volunteer programs at Friends of the Caw, and there's lots of them for any age. For example, did you know that you could join us to pick up trash? Yeah, you can. But you also can just take a trash bag and walk through your neighborhood and pick it up too, because all trash is one windy day away from a river or stream. So there are lots of ways for you to get involved, and you can also contact us, and we'd be happy to help you find different ways to learn more.
Wonderful. Thank you so much for joining us today, Don, and everyone else. Thanks for coming and joining us. We have one call left that's starting immediately next. So wave goodbye to the Riverkeeper, and we'll see you all on the next call. Thank
See you
you.
on the river.